what I remember, men in uniform, the brown uniform, that were walking the streets. Half the time they were drunk. There was a little fruit stand that started in the basement, and then the steps, on each step he had merchandise, and on the top he had apples, and there was a scale there that was that was his daughter, and one of the soldiers threw an apple in her eye and blinded her. So that I remember that vividly. And I also remember Kristallnacht too. The synagogue was smashed, the store windows were smashed. I saw that. Now, I didn't see it happening because a lot of it happened at night too. But I saw it the next day. Couldn't believe it. That's why they called it the night of the broken glass, because there was all this glass all over the place. And there were robberies then too. And then there were the police and the fire department standing and doing absolutely nothing. My father saw the handwriting on the wall, and because he already escaped the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. That's where my parents are from, and my sister as well. I was born 9 years after my sister, and that was in Danzig. My mother had one sister living in America, in Chicago, and he started writing to her. There was no such thing as texting and long-distance phone calls. I mean, that was rare. My father started making plans, and a lot of times he had to go out at night, and that was very dangerous at the time because there was a curfew. We left actually weeks before the war started, and it started in Danzig. Hitler's military invaded Danzig September 1st, 1939. And so we had gotten out just weeks before. So very lucky. I consider myself very lucky. My story is totally different than people who were, in Auschwitz or any of the other concentration camps. I mean, I don't have that story, but I have been to Europe and I've seen them. I was there, I wanted to see it.
So we finally got to New York, and it was close to 2 weeks that we were on that ship. Yeah. And we went to New York, went through Ellis Island. I don't really remember that. I vaguely remember a big place. But I do remember we went to Grand Central Station and got on a train, and I still remember that. And I had my first Coca-Cola on that train. Yeah, so I was impressed. And we ended up in Detroit because the Joint Distribution, which was one of the agencies helping people find places, they found a job for my dad, and of course he would say the Russians trained him as a butcher, so they got him into a kosher butcher place in Detroit, and we ended up in Detroit. So that was 1951. We were staying in a shelter house when we first got to Detroit. I remember that. The Joint Distribution had a couple of houses which were like boarding houses, and each family would have one room, and they would put together stuff that was donated, like irons, ironing boards, the kitchen table, stuff like that. And within 30 days, my father was at work and we were out of there because he was not taking anything from anybody. That's how he was. So years and years go by, and eventually he ends up with his own business, and in the late 60s he was doing quite well. And I think they had, a few good years where they were actually enjoying themselves. We lived in an apartment. Everyone around us were refugees, everyone. I didn't even meet anyone else until I was in elementary school. And even then, I didn't really know, that there were other people in the world who hadn't experienced, what we had experienced. So then eventually, Dad worked, Mom worked. She had a business out of her own home, cash business, women and children only, alterations and sewing, because she was great. I mean, she was just fantastic. She could do anything, knit, crochet, needlepoint, whatever. So she had this business going, and she would buy, the washer and the dryer and the refrigerator, and then she paid for them to go to Israel for the first time around 1960, and they had not seen any of their families. Well, my father had not seen any of his family since 1940.
One of the places I was hidden at was a farm in central France, in a village called Vendeuvre, and the name of the farm was La Chambre. Of all the places I lived at during the war, this was the happiest of them all. My biggest fear during the war was the uniform. One day, a uniformed man, a non-officer, what we call in French a champêtre, fish and game warden, came by the farm, and I panicked. And I ran, I became hysterical, and at that point I surmised that the farmer decided that I could not stay there. There was another Jewish boy hidden in a farm nearby, and his name was Chaim, which in Hebrew means life. It's an irony that he was killed. The farmer took me to the village, and I was placed in the care of a lady called Omur, and she was violent towards me. She transferred me to a lady next door, a Polish immigrant, actually Ukrainian immigrant. She would often say to me in Polish, "Jedzie do Palestina, Żydowski," which means, "Go back to Palestine, you Jew." I don't speak Polish, but I understood that part. I understand. It was the custom of the farmers in the local area to allow people to come by after the collection of the wheat. And so we collected stems of wheat, and it is during that period that the woman that was watching me, and I found the body of the Jewish boy, Chaim. It's very hazy whether I saw his body. I don't remember. I believe I did see his body. However, 30 years later, I was able to find the son of the owner of the farm where the Jewish boy had been hidden. And the son told me the story of the killing of Chaim. What happened is one day, a German patrol pulled up at his farm. They lined up everybody in front of the farm with machine guns and demanded to know where the Jewish boy was. Someone had denounced the boy. The father, seeing no way out, called up to the attic, and the boy came down. A German officer told the boy to run in the field, and Maslach testified to me that the German officer shot him in the back. And that's how we found his body. I've always regretted that I did not spend the rest of my life seeking out that murderer, an officer of the so-called Wehrmacht. I've regretted that.
When my parents got out of the camp and got married, we made our way to the displaced persons camp in Stuttgart, Germany. That's where we were sent. I just finished reading a very interesting book about the Holocaust called We Were the Lucky Ones. And the author recently found out that she was the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and her family went to the displaced persons camp in Stuttgart as well. So there was a very awesome connection to the author of the book, because I went back to the camp, to the displaced persons camp area with my father. And he pointed out where the apartment building was, and we visited the hospital where I was born. I've experienced very little anti-Semitism, maybe a remark here and there, like Jewing somebody down. Somebody said that in front of me, and it was a friend, and I said, you know, that's very insulting. And she said, oh, I didn't realize that. And I think she really meant it, based on her upbringing and where she came from, and she was very apologetic. And she said, I thought that was a term that meant you knew how to negotiate something. not that it was meant in terms of being cheap or trying to get something for a lesser price. So those were the kinds of comments, but never anything beyond that. I think I'm more concerned now than I was when I was in my 30s or 40s. The fact that it is so pronounced, now you can't help but pay attention to it. It's really just up in your face. The sense of Jews being blamed for everything and anything that can possibly go wrong is very unsettling. That's certainly very disconcerting, since I think probably within 10 years there will be no living survivors, because even the children who survived will be well into their late 70s, early 80s. I don't know what we do about that. I guess you have to educate the adults as well as the children so that the information gets passed on, because otherwise it will be forgotten. The deniers who say it never happened and it never could have happened and it was filmed in a studio somewhere, and it breaks my heart because it will become less and less important until another group of people suffer the same fate, and then perhaps it will rear its head again, but otherwise I don't know how we keep that history alive.